Today's guest speaker is from Walk, Massachusetts. His name is Brendan Kiernan, and he's the co-executive director for Walk, Massachusetts. And he's going to talk about pedestrian fatality, which is such really a devastating topic, as you all know, especially if you know somebody who was impacted by it. Brendan, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I can't wait to hear all about what you have to share. Before you put on the screen share, though, and I know you have a great presentation for us, can you just share with the public how you got into this role? What was it that kind of made you say, I gotta do this?
Great. Yeah, thanks. I have now been at Walk Massachusetts for coming up on 11 years this September. And the way I first got involved was, in college, I was a runner. I ran cross country and track at Holy Cross. And so after college, I continued that in, a group in Somerville, the Somerville Roadrunners. And I was really interested in like how we make places safer for runners. That was kind of like the intro for me. And a friend got clued me into a group called Charles River Conservancy, and they were doing a big campaign to make river crossings safer and talking about underpasses along the Charles River as bridges were going to be redeveloped. So I was like, yes, this should definitely happen. So the Somerville Roadrunners and Cambridge Running Club, we were pushing and had a big campaign getting people to sign petitions and contact the governor. And I was like, how do I do this for my job? This is very exciting. So I looked at what other organizations were also signing on to this effort with the Charles River Conservancy, and Walk Boston was one of them. I was like, I need to know more about this organization. They had a job opening at the time. So that, 11 years later, I'm now the co-executive director.
Amazing. It's really a joy to combine your skills, talents, and passion and be able to translate that into something like a career and help so many people and still kind of, fueling your passion, making a difference. Amazing. All right. So I know you have a great presentation to share with us. And I want the audience of participants out there who's going to be watching this in the future to really listen to the statistics, because it's just really it's an eye-opener. And after talking with Brendan, it's really more to empower all of us that there is something we could do. We don't just have to sit back and just kind of let things happen. We can make a difference, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Thanks again, Debbie, for having me. This presentation is about a report that we put out each spring about fatal pedestrian crashes from the year before. So I know you have recently talked to one of my colleagues, Yolanda Spinola, but a little bit about Walk Massachusetts. We're founded in 1990 as Walk Boston, and we work statewide to make walking safer and easier, to encourage better health, cleaner environment, and more vibrant communities. We work with staff, we work with state agencies, and we also work with everyday residents all across the state. So this report, Fatal Pedestrian Crashes in Massachusetts, looks at fatal pedestrian crashes from the previous year, 2023. It only looks at the fatal crashes. So we're looking at, with preliminary data from MassDOT, they have a great dashboard. They have something called the Impact Crash Portal that has a bunch of different resources there. And we like their pre-built dashboards, but you can do a deep dive on all sorts of different data there. We also look at the MassDOT road inventory, which is GIS data layers, so you can see different attributes for different pieces of roadway, who owns them, the different speed limits. We also look at contemporary news reports, so how are communities covering these crashes, or are crashes happening and then there is no local coverage, and what might that say about the crashes as well? Then we also use the tools out there that Google has, Google Street View. What does that street look like? And this is the third year of the report. Folks can look at this is just a presentation about it, but if you want to look at the actual report, and there are some interactive maps, you can go to walkmass.org/fatal23. So in 2023, there were 346 total traffic deaths in Massachusetts. That's no matter, how you're getting around, whether it's, car, bus, bike, walking. And at least 69 pedestrians lost their lives in these crashes. And that's about 20% of the total. And, taking a step back, putting this in context, what does 2023 look like according to other years? This is around average. Over the last 22 years, the average number of fatal crashes involving pedestrians was 70.2. The previous year we looked at, 2022, was a terrible year. It was only one of 3 years since 2002. 2003 had 85 fatal crashes. 2005 had 80 fatal crashes, and 2002 we have it up there at 98 with 80 or more. So, this year was a lot better. So once again, like, our report is only looking at fatal crashes, but we don't focus on serious injuries. But there is another one of the dashboards on MassDOT's website that shows statewide crashes by severity and year. And according to that, at least 371 pedestrians were seriously injured in 2023. And serious injury crashes can be life-altering, leaving pedestrians with long-term or permanent health challenges or disabilities. And to put that number in context, in the year before, 2022, when we had the worst fatal crashes, the serious crashes was at 325. So, that number can fluctuate a little bit. That has consistently been over 300. But we find that we're putting out this report a little on the early side because it's only 3 or 4 months after the year end. So we feel more confident just looking at the fatal crashes to start pulling some of these trends out.
Brendan, before you advance the slide, what's the theory behind the spike in the rates on 2022?
So, some of the theories are kind of all over the place. Some of it is like, this is a reaction after people were driving more reckless during the pandemic and the roads were wide open. And so, like, there was a lot of fast speeding and people were used to that. And now some congestion is coming back and people are still driving recklessly. That is one theory there. I think just the fact that there were so many serious crashes, like, that number is over 300 both years. Sometimes, like, the difference between a really serious injury crash and a fatal crash can be very, very slight. So maybe we're just a little bit luckier this year as opposed to the previous year. So I think that you need to dig in a little bit more on the whys. And some of the findings we'll talk about from this year, I think, could also be applied for previous years as well. There's a number of different factors. I think the other context laying thing I want to put out here is some people have said there's way less enforcement, and I'm not sure if that's necessarily an issue, but it's another one that people have posed as a possibility. The next context piece really is what's going on nationwide. So 2023, over 7,300 people were hit and killed. Pedestrians were hit and killed in traffic crashes. So when we look at that, we look at Massachusetts and say, all right, Massachusetts is much better than other places. Like, I'm still very concerned that we had, almost 70 people hit and killed on our roadways, but we're doing better than the rest of the US. Like, that's good. And that's also bad. So, like, we should also be looking at what good things, where is Massachusetts going, and what different things are we looking at that to make our roadways safer? Because, if only 70 people were hit and killed in all 50 states, like, this number 7,300 would be cut in half. So, and that number has really risen the last couple of years. The the other speculation on why this number has risen is vehicle design, which we can get into a little bit later. But, so many of the vehicles that are being sold today are just much bigger than vehicle models that have been sold over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And some of the front ends are much higher. So instead of, if someone were to get struck by a vehicle ending up on the hood or, up and over it, they're getting pushed down. So, and the injuries that they're suffering are on higher up on their body as opposed to lower down on lower leg injuries. So, this graphic is from the Governor's Highway Safety Association, and from their report, Pedestrian Traffic Fatalities by State 2023, preliminary data from January through December. If people want to go to their website and find out more about nationwide stuff, you can go to ghsa.org. They have a bunch of different reports that they put out throughout the year. But they projected that drivers struck and killed 7,318 people walking in 2023, which was down 5.4% from the year before, but still 14.1% above 2019, the last pre-pandemic year. So, and a big thing here that we have stressed each year we've released this report, we believe both on the state and local level, there's a need for more action to slow drivers down so people trying to cross the street can do so safely. I really like this graphic from National Highway Traffic Safety Administration because not only it incorporates like fatality and serious injury risk, but it also incorporates like if you are behind a wheel, like your reaction time, that cone of vision there, you can see so much more in that graphic on the left. And this is making sure you can slow down to see people in the street. Your cone of vision is much better for your reaction time if you're going slower. Makes sense, but I had never really seen it in a graphic and expressed graphically. Because if you're going faster, you're needing to react much quicker to anything going on in front of you. So I think it's a pretty nice graphic.
Very good.
Yeah. And that's a tough thing to explain sometimes. So like they do it pretty well. So I am going to acknowledge there is a ton of text on this slide. But these are kind of the main 7 findings that I'm going to address during the rest of this presentation that we have started pulling a thread on from crash data from the last year. I really think each one of these could be its own deep dive, whether an article by a reporter or a grad student or master's student who is looking for a topic to go a little bit deeper on. So finding 1, of 351 cities and towns here in Massachusetts, 40 had at least 1 pedestrian fatality, and 8 of those 40 had multiple pedestrian crash deaths. So kind of all across the state, right? Like places big and small, down on the Cape, out in the Berkshires, Merrimack Valley, Boston, Springfield, kind of all over the place. So there's not one root cause or type of place that is seeing these problems. And this is the list. This is the list of all the places that had a fatal crash. Lots of different places, lots of different communities. I'm going to dive in a little bit more on 2 of these that had more than 1, Boston and Springfield. The fatal crash numbers were pretty close. Boston had 8, Springfield had 7. But the rate was much higher in Springfield if we're looking at how big the cities were. And an interesting piece, Springfield also had more total fatal crashes. So not just pedestrians, but all users of our roadways. They had 19 fatal crashes and Boston had 16. So that's also very concerning. And when we're talking about that rate, we looked at a deeper dive on Springfield in the report 2 years ago, which looked at the 2021 data. It's still striking, places so different in population size can have similar fatal crash numbers. Springfield had a population in census data from 2022 around 150,000. That's less than a quarter the size of Boston. Boston's, was up around 650,000 people in 2022. So there is a group out in Springfield, Walk Bike Springfield, working to improve the safety of walking and biking there. They've really identified a major problem. So many 4-lane arterial roadways pass through residential neighborhoods that don't really have any accommodations for pedestrians crossing the street. So there'll be like long stretches of the roadways, and there are neighbors on both sides of these fast moving streets. That community organization really hopes the city is going to establish a complete streets council. It was authorized as part of their complete streets resolution they approved about 8 years ago. So that's kind of on their list of things that they want to get done to kind of move that forward. So finding two, older adults were hit and killed at a higher rate than those in other age groups. This is the third year in a row we've seen this. Over 1/3 of the fatal crash victims were over age of 65, and that's 18% of our population here in Massachusetts. But, what does that look like nationwide? Well, nationwide, this is also an outlier. Only 18% of fatal crash victims were age 65, which matches the slice of the population here in Massachusetts. This 1 year wasn't really an outlier. 2023's percentage was actually lower than 2022, where it was around 38%, and 2021, where it was about 36%. So we're using people age 65 or over as the definition here of older adults in this report. But when we use the AARP definition of people 50 and older, they made up over 56.5% of pedestrian crash deaths in 2023. So in my mind, what does this mean? I think this really points to the need for creating age-friendly, walkable communities. There's a great map that AARP has on their website called a Livable Communities Map, and it's not just Massachusetts; it's all across the country where you can find examples of age-friendly and livability efforts that people are working on. Here in Massachusetts and also across the country. And when we say, walkable communities are age-friendly communities, what do we mean? This is a good example of earlier this year, or last fall, actually, in Springfield. We were working with Walk Bike Springfield on an effort funded by AARP through one of their community challenge grants. We did a walk audit near one of the senior housing locations. And this senior housing location actually is sited so perfectly near a senior center. So there's senior activities nearby, there's senior housing nearby. Fantastic. On the overall plan, you did a good job. You located them near each other. The problem is one of those 4-lane arterial roadways is in between the two. So people that live in the senior housing actually don't walk to the senior center because they're so concerned about that main intersection. There's actually a shuttle bus that runs from the senior center to the senior housing to make sure that folks can utilize it. So we were like, this is an opportunity to do a walk audit. Let's do one in between these two places. So this is a photo of us crossing Roosevelt Ave, which is that 4-lane arterial. And you can see me there, looking at my watch as I'm also looking at the walk sign. Because I am not halfway across the street and it's already blinking red. You can see it looks like a solid red in the photo because it's a still photo. But Rebecca is the woman using the mobility device. And she is not a quarter of the way across the street. So I completely understand why she told us she would never do this walk by herself because she just did not feel comfortable and she would get stuck in the middle of the street. So one of the things coming out of this, we gave recommendations to the city staff to improve the signal timing. So what does that mean? That means give people more time to walk because you can't safely get across. So they did make changes to the timing there. So that's a good win, right? That's an excellent thing that should be done. This photo also tells me that you need to make sure if you're going out and doing things, get good photos of people doing things instead of just the photos that I take when I'm out there documenting the problems. No, also document these areas and show how people use the space. That's super important to help tell the story. Finding 3, more than half of the fatal pedestrian crashes took place in environmental justice census block groups. So, and environmental justice is, based on 3 demographic criteria. This is in state law, developed by the state's Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. It was passed in the environmental bill that passed in 2021, November 2021. So environmental justice is defined as there's a couple different criteria. The first is annual median household income, not more than 65% of the statewide annual median household income. Second, minorities comprise 40% or more of the population. The third, 25% or more of households lack English language proficiency. So if any of those is a factor in that census block group, that can be defined as an environmental justice block group. And then there's a combination. Maybe minorities comprise 25% or more of the population. Annual median household income does not exceed 150% of the statewide annual median household income. And why are we flagging this? Why is this a problem? This shows that this skewed spatial distribution of fatal crashes demonstrates that environmental justice communities face disproportionate harm, in large part because of historic planning injustices, historic transportation planning injustices. This could mean proximity to high-speed, busy roads, which puts residents at risk for fatal crashes, as well as long-term health disparities from accompanying water, air, and noise pollution exposure. There's really a cycle of economic disinvestment that contributes to the persistence of racial segregation today. So on the graphic here, this is the fatal pedestrian crashes from the last 3 years of our report, so 2021, 22, and 23. The slightly bigger dots are 2023, and those are overlaid with the environmental justice block groups. Once again, this map is interactive if you were to go to walkmass.org/fatal23, and you can zoom in and find out the different areas those are happening. There's also a slight little key down at the bottom left, where if you were to click that on the map, it would also define which the different colors are, so you can see which different features of environmental justice that census block group might entail. So what does this mean? We think there should be additional investment in environmental justice communities to support changes to the built environment that would promote safety, economic vitality, and just build community. So traffic calming measures, clearly marked and accessible crosswalks, more trees, tree-lined sidewalks, especially on hot days like this. Adding more trees, multiple benefits. And then also, thinking about highway to boulevard conversions. I think a place like Roosevelt Ave, again, in Springfield, if you make that street a more livable place and make it more comfortable for folks, you're reconnecting different sections of the neighborhood. Finding 4. More than 3/4 took place on streets controlled by municipalities. So that means the city or town is responsible for that roadway. Meanwhile, less than 20% were controlled by MassDOT, the State Highway Department of Transportation. And then the last 4% were kind of a mix of different places, whether it's, Massport by airports, UMass, or private property. And I guess what that means these are the people who can make the changes, right? It's, if they're happening on municipal roadways, your local city staff or your local elected officials can really push the needle to make those changes. They can't say state won't let us do it. But this really supports that maybe our local communities need more funding for making these changes, and not just doing the status quo of repaving what's out there, but really taking a step back and being all right, are the roadways that we have in our community working for everyone in our community right now? Or do we need to rethink about how people get around? Have our commuting patterns or other patterns changed over the last 10, 15 years? Have they changed since the beginning of the COVID pandemic? Are there more people working from home in our community, or not commuting all the way into Boston, but every day, but maybe 3 days a week, they're actually commuting to the library downtown, and they're working out of a co-working space in our community. So there's different thoughts that need to go into that. But that also points to, they get state money, which is called here in Massachusetts Chapter 90 funding. That's like the traditional money that gets given out by the state to local communities to do repaving projects, do road reconstruction projects. They can use that Chapter 90 money for designing and implementing safe streets on their own roadways. They typically don't use the money that way. They use it for repaving and other auto-oriented purposes. But projects eligible for Chapter 90 funds include accessible ramps, separated bike lanes, adding flex posts, raised crosswalks, sidewalks, paths, pedestrian signals, speed humps, and even getting consultants to give you some ideas about what you should be spending your money on. Because sometimes local communities don't have the staff. They have, one staff in the planning department who has to do everything. So Chapter 90 money can be used to kind of supplement that staff as well, to kind of give you what is working, help us with our problems.
Brendan,
yes.
Quick question about that one. The slide here, UMass, is that UMass Boston? Is that University of Massachusetts Boston?
It was actually UMass Amherst. There was a fatal crash on a roadway out in Amherst that was actually like on the campus. So, yeah. So yeah, it's interesting how some of the jurisdiction in the database is coded differently. So yeah, some roadways are owned actually by the UMass system, whether it's at UMass Boston or it's at UMass Amherst or UMass Dartmouth. And then Massport could be any number of roadways in or around the airport. Massport also has some roadways in the Boston Seaport area. So they have a bunch of different roadways like that. And then private property, that could have referred to a parking lot. Sometimes, parking lots, fatal crashes that happen in parking lots aren't always included in the data set, but more and more they are including that, especially if the crash happens on the main travel way through a parking lot. But yeah, that's probably what the private property refers to as well. So. And I touched on this a little bit at the top, but the vehicle type, more and more, I think, is getting more attention into what could potentially be causing, the uptick over the last couple of years of some of these crashes nationwide. Here in Massachusetts, over 70% were passenger cars. That's the what was on the checkbox, and over 20% were defined as light trucks. That light truck category is not helpful at the moment because that includes all vans, minivans, pickups, SUVs. And here's that same information kind of split out. That light truck, and I have a photo on the next slide that shows why light truck is a not helpful category for trying to make assumptions here. Both of these vehicles are defined as light truck. On the left there, that's probably like a new model Ford F-150, and the smaller one next to it is a 2011 Ford Ranger. They're both pickup trucks. They both can probably carry the same amount of stuff in their truck bed, but I'm 6'3", and I'm standing in front of both of them there. The one on the bigger one, it's, halfway up my shoulder. It's almost up to my shoulder. And the other one, it's like at my hip. So these are both light trucks in the definition. The good thing is the state passed something called Act to Reduce Traffic Fatalities last session. And in there's a piece that requires the make and model of vehicles involved in crashes with vulnerable road users, like people walking, people biking, maintenance workers on the side of the road. That information needs to be made publicly available for crashes starting this year in 2024. So you'd be able to kind of parse out a little bit further, like, oh, in of those light trucks, a large percentage of them are pickup trucks made after 2018, or you'd be able to start parsing out some of that stuff. And then maybe we come up with other regulations of, what, if these larger vehicles are more responsible for these crashes, like they should have a higher excise tax, or parking permits for them should be much higher because they're causing more destruction on our roadways. Finding six, about 70% of these fatal crashes occurred in the dark. So that's before sunrise or after sunset. And that's actually lower than what they've been seeing nationwide. I think that's just kind of a little bit of noise, like, because our fatal crash number is low. So if we took into account all serious crashes after nightfall or in the dark, like maybe it would be closer to that 77%. But what does this mean? So I think what it doesn't show here is, we don't know in the data is there pedestrian focus lighting at these crash locations? Are crosswalks aligned with streetlights so people trying to cross can easily be seen? Because on the crash form, there is a light conditions field, but it just has dark lighted roadway. But we don't actually know, like, if I was standing at a crosswalk and I had 1 foot in the street, so the person's supposed to yield to me, they might not be able to see me because the roadway is lit, but the sidewalks there are not, and they might not be able to see me. Other information that is kind of crucial to this that is not included is street conditions. Where is the nearest crosswalk? Is there a crosswalk? Are there sidewalks? What shape are they in? During the winter, like, is snow cleared, or are people having to walk in the street because that is not possible to walk on a sidewalk? So that, this kind of supports Federal Highway has a recommendations called nighttime visibility for safety. They have some recommendations for crosswalk visibility enhancements for pedestrians, such as rectangular rapid flash beacons, which lead to 47% reduction in crashes, and advanced markings and signs, just making it safer for people to cross the road by giving people driving multiple cues to expect the need to yield at that crosswalk. And then there was an article just this past December in the New York Times titled, "Why Are So Many American Pedestrians Dying at Night?" And two of the sections there looked at vehicle design and devices. So the vehicle design, instead of like the larger vehicles that I was just referencing, they actually were looking at maybe automatic transmissions are a problem here, because the overwhelming majority of cars on the road in the US are automatic as opposed to manual drive. That makes it easier for drivers to pay attention to things other than driving their cars, whether that's their phone or something else. And then the devices, Americans spend nearly 3 times as much time interacting with their phones while driving than drivers in Britain, which could be back to the automatic transmissions. If you need to use both your hands to drive, you're probably not going to be on a phone all the time. So, definitely something that I had not thought about before. But
good points.
Yeah. And the last piece here is, at least 7 of those fatal crashes were recorded as hit and run crashes where the driver left the scene of the crash. The interesting thing here, though, is from news articles, like, we found at least 13 drivers left the scene of fatal pedestrian crashes. So like the data that is reported, like, doesn't necessarily reflect the reality of what's out on the street. And 8 pedestrians died in those hit and run crashes because one driver actually struck 2 people in a work zone in Waltham. But it's a little unclear why a news report may indicate a driver left the scene of a crash, yet it's not noted as a hit and run on the police report. All fields are required to be filled in on the crash report, so there's a need to also understand what is left out when looking at crash data sometimes. And yeah, so the Boston 25 News did a good deep dive back in October 2023 that said any information about where a fatal hit and run case in Massachusetts stands, even follow-up phone calls, it's often hard to come by. So like there is, because allegedly sometimes an investigation is still ongoing. So like there's not a lot of data to share there. So definitely concerning. But what's being done? like really like, what is being done here. You know, kind of on a regional level, a bunch of different community planning organizations received large amounts of money from federal government through this is from the bipartisan infrastructure law. Some of this funding is coming through. USDOT Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program made it possible for a number of places to start thinking about regionally. And with a state with 351 cities and towns, we really need to be thinking regionally. Like, how can we think across municipal borders to make our streets and our commutes and just everyday travel safer? These really are just getting underway, and we hope to share more information how people can engage with these in going forward. But it should be noted that most of Massachusetts' own transportation funding is not going to pedestrian efforts, and that's a number far larger that will be available in Safe Streets for All. These same MPOs that are doing this important planning work need to start thinking about changing their project selection criteria. This is pretty wonky, but they need to start thinking about changing their project selection criteria. So the small scale safety projects like curb extensions, new lighting, raised crosswalks are consistently considered for funding and are ranked higher than road expansion or capacity projects because they can make a really big difference in neighborhoods. This is what I just talked about. It's super important because in a place like Springfield, crossing Roosevelt Ave there, if there was a center island to cross Roosevelt Ave, maybe more seniors would choose to walk to the senior center because they knew they could at least get halfway across and then wait for the light to change again. Not a perfect situation, but it would be, getting us to a better place there. Other things that are going on. Boston has been doing great work the last couple of years, and just this past fall, they had announced a safety surge. And there's 3 big areas there: speed humps, safer intersections, and safer signals. Like we talked about, or Chapter 90 money can be used for some of these things. They're using their Chapter 90 money to do these things. One of the exciting things is speed humps used to be part of a neighborhood slow streets program. It was a much more contained effort in the city of Boston, where they were looking at just specific zones, and they would work on 3 to 5 zones across the city at a time. They really showed that was so successful because people were really clamoring, how does my neighborhood get to be in the next zone? So they said, you know what? The world hasn't ended. Speed humps work, slows traffic down. People can feel safer crossing the street, biking on the street, pushing their strollers between parks and the rest of the neighborhood. So you know what? Speed humps are now part of normal doing business. When we are, repaving a street or redoing a street for many of our neighborhood streets, we can just add speed humps now. So it's not every street in the city of Boston. Arterial roadways or roadways that have lots of bus service, those will still, go through a normal process of how do we, repave a street or redo the design. But speed humps within the neighborhood streets, that's definitely, just part of doing business now, which is super exciting. And, I talked to WBUR about that. And, I said, if you install speed humps, that's 24/7 enforcement, right? We don't have to worry about can we get a police officer here to slow people down? And then the police officer goes away. It's no, the speed hump is there. So very exciting. And what Act to Reduce Traffic Fatalities was last session. That was big. That there were some good pieces in there to make things safer in the legislation front. This session, there really isn't much going on since they passed that piece, but we're hoping for next session, a couple different things. One, how can the state think about regulating vehicle design? And then 2, intelligent speed assist. This is pretty much a way to do a way to slow down vehicles, but also be smart about it. We have the, Uber can limit where you can get a car pickup, right? If at certain airports and stuff like that, you can only get an Uber in a geocoded zone, and you can only call it when you're in the parking garage at Logan. Similar to this, you could, with intelligent speed assist, if you add this to fleets, it would make it so you can't drive faster when you're in a speed zone than the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. It's a way to, remotely way to control fleets and control the over speeding. It's possible to, Europe is adding this on all new vehicles now as of this month. But it might be something that maybe the state looks at for repeat reckless driver offenders and stuff like that. There's already kind of a model with the ignition interlock device program for OUI offenders, repeat OUI offenders. So it's definitely something to think a little bit more about. But then, the other thing, what can the everyday person do to make an impact? Because we can't just outsource this all to our elected officials. Because they have done some things and that's great and they should continue to do stuff, but we can also make a difference in our own neighborhoods. We think walk audits are super important way to get people out on the street and looking at the problems. And we think that everyone should lead a walk audit. It's not just complaining, but it's out there seeing the problems and then working together to identify ways that we can fix it short-term and long-term. This is actually a group of walk audit participants from last July. This was a very hot day in Springfield, but it was also great, being with community members and hearing some of their problems and also like some of the opportunity that they saw for, adding new crosswalks or adding new connections to make sure that neighbors on both sides of a dangerous, busy road could interact more. So, as part of this report release, we also released a Walk Audit Academy video series, which is just a short number of videos that kind of walks through the steps of what it could mean to lead your own walk audit. We think everyone can be an expert, and we don't think you need to be an expert to do a walk audit, but we have these videos with some advice of like, here's how you can plan out your own route, or here's what you want to make sure to include if you're going to create a flyer to invite folks to take part in a walk audit. Always make sure you list the date and the time, right? Like the simple things that sometimes you don't think about. And a big thing is like a walk audit can really help identify some places that do need that short-term action. But, how can we plug these into like longer term visions that our community have for, redesigning intersections, and how can it plug into maybe some efforts that your community is already undertaking? The Walk Audit Academy videos, like those are all available on our website at walkmass.org/WAA. And the first video here is actually, I'm not going to play it. It's just a screenshot, but it really dives into like why walkability is important. And, we have a couple different speakers as part of these Walk Audit Academy videos. And the first one is actually Mike McGinn, who's the executive director of America Walks. America Walks is a nationwide organization working to make communities all across the U.S. More walkable and welcoming to people of all ages and races. And I will say, like, Mike is a great advocate. Mike is fantastic. Definitely check out the America Walks website if you want to learn more about them as well. And then the last thing that we have done over the last 2 years now is we also like understand that people still need a little bit of help, need a little bit of guidance sometimes. So like we used the videos and like worked with a cohort of folks, first in Worcester as a pilot program, and then in Springfield this past fall, using the videos as like a inside outside classroom thing where people watch the videos on their own. Then we come together on Zoom or in person and kind of go through the different things, and folks lead their own walk audit. So during the span of the training program, in a time where we as staff would probably have led one walk audit with a group, there were 5 walk audits that were led in both Worcester and Springfield in that same period of time. And we helped coach people on it and, make some recommendations for them. And then we all came together and people shared out their findings and, shared it with some of their their city staff and elected officials, so they could also hear some of the problems and some of the things and the opportunities that people were uncovering. So, we'd love to help folks out if we can find a way to do that in their community too. And that is all I have. So, thank you. Thank you so much, Debbie.
Oh, great. Great. So,
I can either stop sharing or I can skip any
that would
slide.
be good. If you could just stop the screen share, and then I can ask you some questions. So you talked about the Walk Audit Academy. Can you just give us a little bit more information about that? How many, is it miles? Do they have to do 2 miles worth, or is there a number of people that you have to make it a legitimate walk audit?
Those are all great questions. First off, I will say, number one, a legitimate walk audit is any way you want to define it. I think the main things that go into a walk audit, to define it as a legitimate walk audit to me, is you're getting out on the street and you're making observations and you're coming up with some potential recommendations. I think those are the main things. Because some people that took part in like the cohort out in Worcester and in Springfield, like some people were like, I don't want to like write up a big report. And I was like, I don't want you to do that either. So like, some people just wrote up a couple bullet points, and they were like, these are some of the things we found out there. Someone else made a Power or Google slideshow because they were like, I'm comfortable using Google Slides. I'm like, great, that's fantastic. Someone else was like, I have a drone. Do you think I can like take drone footage of us doing our walk audit? I was like, you can do whatever you want. So we really think of like, how can you best share the story of like the change you want to see? I think that's the big piece there.
Yeah, and also knowing who to share that information with, so that way you can get the changes that you feel is important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the times, like that is the questions people come to us with, like, who do I even contact? I have no idea. So as staff, we're happy to help either introduce people or point them in the right direction. And some of the times it's digging in and finding out okay, who actually owns this roadway? Oh, wait, this isn't even my town. Technically, MassDOT owns this roadway. Okay, now that I know MassDOT owns this roadway, maybe I should contact my town though, because maybe they have problems with it too, and they have been frustrated because they haven't gotten the right answers. Because when it comes down to it, as a resident, I don't necessarily care who owns the roadway. I just want it to be fixed. I just want to be able to cross it and cross it safely. So as staff here at Walk Massachusetts, if we can help you connect the dots behind the, look behind the curtain and see how things actually are getting done, we're happy to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The last piece you had asked about the length, I think a lot of the times with a walk audit, the shorter the better, because you want to be able to spend time observing things. So a lot of the times it might not be more than half a mile, because maybe there is a sidewalk on both sides of the street and you want to walk up one side of a roadway and then stand at an intersection for a while, cross each leg of the intersection to see what that feels like, walk back the other side of the street, I think less is more sometimes, because you're less concerned about oh my gosh, we need to keep moving. We need to, we're spending too much time here. No, you can't spend too much time there. It might make sense to be hey, you know what? We're just going to look at these 2 or 3 intersections, and you know what? This one's near a school. So we should probably check it out, what it's like near drop off in the morning, or what it's like at pickup in the evening. What changes? What does it look like at different times of day? Or gosh, the school has the school zone lights flashing during school days, during the week, and that's great because it seems like people are actually paying attention to that. but soccer here is here every weekend, and like people are driving really fast, and they shouldn't, because there's a ton of little kids playing soccer and families loading and unloading or like biking over to the fields. So yeah, I think like kind of getting a sense from other participants, like what would be a good time for us to check this out? Like it, because our streets and our neighborhoods like ebb and flow throughout the day as people move about their life. So thinking about like what are different times of day and different challenges that people might be facing is also another thing you might want to consider.
Yeah, very good point. And in a way, it does make sense to have another person with you so that that other person can have their own view.
Mhm.
Maybe you're missing out on another perspective, right? So it's good to have at least one person to be with you. I have been seeing some changes in some areas near where I live. Public schools, there is they have a crossing guard, but there's also another area where um, it's a more popular, besides using the crossing guard, another popular spot for people to cross. They have added one of those flashing lights, the flashing pedestrian lights, which has been really a game changer. And I'm seeing more and more of that,
Yeah.
which is great. And you talked about the speed hump.
Yeah.
It's called the speed bump.
So
The bump
yeah.
was actually much steeper a long
Yes.
time ago and much shorter in
Yeah.
width. Now the hump is more like a gradual but bigger. I think it's like 2 or 2.5 feet wide, is it?
Yeah, they're much wider and much more gentle. Yeah, so thanks for calling that out. Like a speed hump is, what is being installed in Boston, and a number of other places have started adapting those much wider, and they don't impact drainage, because they don't go all the way to the curb. So, gutters, I mean, the side of the road can still flow, no problem. Um, but yeah, a speed bump is like more the traditionally, like I picture it in like a parking lot somewhere where like, yeah, it is almost vehicle shattering, like you're shaking as you're going up and over. Yeah, that's not what is being installed. You definitely see those more on like private property and stuff like that. But these speed humps that are being installed, the goal is to like make it safe and comfortable to go over at 15-20 miles per hour still. So like slowing down drivers to a more reasonable speed to like basically be going on neighborhood streets where you might have people walking, biking, or even getting out and pulling out of driveways. I When I was talking to that reporter for WBUR, she said she had just talked to someone who lived in Boston neighborhood Jamaica Plain, and she lived on a street where speed humps had just been installed, and the woman had a driveway, and she was like, I can actually now back out of my driveway and not be scared that I'm going to get clipped. So it's useful to people driving vehicles too, like the speed humps to regulate speeds and make it better.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, the other piece about school zones is MassDOT recently updated their school zone guidance, where school zones didn't used to apply to high schools. Like they were actually only for K-8, but they expanded the definition of school zone so it now can be around high schools too, which means that you can create 20-mile-per-hour school zones in or around high schools, which I think is great. And that's something that just happened within the last 18 months or so, I think. So that's definitely another good way to like how do we keep creating safer places for people to be getting around our communities. So
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's great. That's great. I mean, it's good to cover all the bases, and high schoolers, they're just
they got a
yeah,
lot going on, right?
they have a lot going on. They have their device on their hand. They're talking with their peers. They don't have their parents supervising them, holding their hands across the street.
Start very early before their brain is fully functioning. Like, so yeah. So I think the more support that we can give there is a good idea too. And using a proven model, school zone, like we know, and drivers too, they understand what a school zone is instead of, introducing new infrastructure that people might be confused about in the initial and then get used to. But school zones, people know what those are. So
Yeah, yeah. And I love in the beginning of your presentation how you talked about, and you really emphasized the data that you shared with us are fatality data, not necessarily the ones who, that includes the one who were struck and hurt. Big and good point. I mean, there is sometimes, depending on the severity of the injury, it's a very fine line between being hurt and being killed.
yes, yes. And another thing building on that is that this data set uses the definition that is used for fatal crashes is that a person died within 30 days of the crash incident. So if a person was to be hospitalized and died 35 days at 34, 35 days after a crash, they're actually not included in the fatal crash data set. So, and that has happened here in Massachusetts in over the last 2 years. There was a young girl that was hit and killed in Worcester within the last 3 years. She died after the 30-day window. So she is not included in the fatal data set, even though we know she died on our roadways, but she is not included in that data set because at some point you need to draw a line in data sets. And so because, a person could be seriously injured in a crash and it could impact their life. And years later, they could die, and it could have been complications from the crash, but they're not going to go back and change that fatal number. So, just an interesting thing that you learn as you start, pulling back the onion that is crash data.
Well, thank you so much for clarifying that. Well, we're at the top of the hour almost. Is there any golden nuggets that you want us to, really take away from our conversation today? Because you've shared so much. What are like maybe two, maybe three points that you want people to really own?
So I have that's a great question. So I think the first thing is like if people want to learn more about Walk Massachusetts, they can go to walkmass.org. They can sign up for our email lists. They can, shoot us an email to learn more. They can dig in on our website, find a little bit more about what we're doing. The other thing is that I meant to bring up when I was talking about the older adult crashes is that Massachusetts is actually in the process of updating the Age and Dementia Friendly Massachusetts Action Plan. So I'd encourage folks to attend a listening session and offer feedback about incorporating efforts to create more walkable communities. So, you can Google for that, or I can send a link out afterwards. But I think a big piece there is, other things that could go into creating more age and dementia friendly communities is more benches, more places where people can, use public bathrooms for free. I think those are two big things there.
Yeah, I love that. And even earlier, you mentioned trees, how important it is to have, well, it looks more inviting for one thing, and it offers, shade and beauty depending on the time of the year. They're the type of trees that has, beautiful flowers, but all these different things that we take for granted or maybe don't realize is there for us.
Yeah.
Is, under the lens of, Walk Massachusetts and really the Walk audit,
Well, the last thing with trees is I have a little handheld laser thermometer, and like we took it out on a walk 2 weeks ago. It started at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon in a black parking lot. The surface temperature of that was 113 degrees. We got a quarter mile away in the middle of a park under a giant shade tree. It was 76 degrees on that grass. So it really underscored like, wow, shade and grass and like impervious surfaces, like, wow. Like, yeah.
Well, Brendan, I learned so much from you, and I hope the viewers out there as well. I want to thank you for being on the program and wish you all the best. And I hope many people contact Walk Massachusetts to get more information about how they can implement their own walk audits in their own communities. And also, I want to thank the Quincy Health Department for sponsoring Aging Strong.